Good morning and welcome to Rising. Fancy seeing you here. It's time for our show. We're kicking off another excellent week. How are you, Niall?
I am great, and I'm delighted to be here with you, Robbie. How has your weekend been?
It was good. Very cold again in D.C., so stayed in Saturday night and did a variety of things. I didn't catch a single second of the Oscars, unfortunately.
I caught a few seconds, and those were enough.
I think I've said this previously. I did not see almost every film that was nominated. I did not see a Nora one, which I have no idea what that is. But people whose opinions, whose attitudes about entertainment I generally agree with, seemed happy about this. So I guess I'm in favor of it without knowing a single thing about the movie.
I have not seen it whatsoever. I should probably disagree if people who you like it, but that's a whole.
We're now fighting over something we really know nothing about instead of fighting over something we only kind of know nothing about.
We know zero about. Anyway, let's get to things we do know at least something about. What is on your radar, Robbie?
Here's something I think we're less likely to fight about, Niall. MAGA world is not happy with Attorney General Pam Bondi. The much-touted release of the Epstein files last week went over like a lead balloon after it was revealed that the 200-page binder distributed to hand-picked conservative influencers contained essentially zero new information. Those present apparently believed that they'd gotten their hands on huge bombshells that would lead to massive prison sentences for serial sex predators, now exposed for the first time. That was not the case, and we all know it. I don't usually agree with Steve Bannon and Laura Loomer. They're not in my faction of the conservative coalition, but they were dead freaking right to call this out as a PR disaster for Bondi. Here's Bannon describing the release as a fiasco to conservative influencer Jack Posobiec, who was also surprised by the underwhelming nature of the release.
Yeah, we're there to see the Prime Minister.
We have huge breaking news about Carter. There we are right there. Great shot. This is the color guard.
So that's imminent.
Yesterday, what was the problem? Pam Bondi oversold this. You had every major influencer there. You had Cerno, you had yourself, you had DC Drano, you had, you had Congressman Anna Paulina Luna. You got people all over this. It was a big disappointment. Does she, in fact, is DOJ not have the files? Because they sent a letter. And what I will tell you, if there's information there, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino are the two best guys in the world to organize this and to get it out. If it can be gotten out, I have no idea about the legality of it. But if you got Kash on point and you have Dan Bongino on point, you have the two best guys. The fiasco yesterday was because of, in your best judgment, why did that happen?
Well, I think what happened was that people were expecting there to be new stuff in these binders. Certainly, we expected there to be new stuff in the binders as well. And we had been invited to the White House.
But hang on, she should. I mean,
it was Caroline Leavitt. It was Caroline Leavitt and JD. That was the invite, was to meet with them, do policy briefings, et cetera, et cetera. The name Epstein was never once even mentioned prior to this. So then the binders come in, and of course we've seen that she's been doing the media tour saying that this is going to come, it's on the desk, we're going to have it soon. Puts this out. Okay, here.
So she came over and joined the meeting essentially.
She joined up. Yeah.
So let's circle back to that in a minute. First, I want to go further back, way, way back to 2012. Remember how December of that year was supposedly bringing about the end of civilization and the apocalypse, apparently according to the ancient Mayan calendar? And then it never happened. Oopsies. Predicting calamities that never come to pass is something that religious groups have done over the years. Various doomsday cults have said the end is nigh, and then when the prophesied destruction comes to pass, does not come to pass, unfortunately, do the faithful become disenchanted? Well, sometimes yes, but in many cases no. They continue to cling to their beliefs. Now, unlike those who believed in the Mayan apocalypse prediction, people who are insistent that the government is covering up files relating to Jeffrey Epstein have good reason to think that. Let me say this plainly. It is not a conspiracy theory to assert that there are many, many, many more pages on Epstein's associates that have never before been released by the government. Even some mainstream media reporters readily concede this. Even a very negative write-up in Vox that dismisses Epstein truth seekers as, quote, the latest variation of QAnon, well, eagerly admits that, quote, it is certainly likely that the FBI has more documents on Epstein that have not been released. Others, however, can barely conceal their disdain for MAGA people focusing on transparency surrounding Epstein. CNN media mouthpiece Brian Stelter railed on Friday that MAGA's Epstein conspiracy theory was, quote, entering a dangerous new phase. He wrote, myriad right-wing media figures have for years suggested that the government is hiding secrets relating to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted pedophile who died by suicide in 2019 while awaiting trial on federal sex trafficking charges. Many versions of the conspiracy theory have asserted that the government is covering up a list of powerful men who also committed heinous crimes. You hear that? You think there's more to the story? Conspiracy theorist? This is incredible. It's a fact. It's a fact that Epstein associated with rich and powerful people in both parties. It's a fact that he received a suspiciously light sentence and resumed his associations after he'd served it. You're not crazy for thinking that he may have had dirt on somebody. We know he had dirt on all sorts of people. All that said, however, MAGA officials like Bondi are doing themselves no favors by promising disclosure and then failing to deliver. Thinking there's more to the Epstein story is not a deranged cult belief, but it does look like one to outsiders when MAGA leaders who are in a position to release more files subsequently fail to do so. Part of the problem, I suspect, is that conservatives are just so used to being out of power and complaining about it that they don't always know how to behave when they can't just blame everything on the people in charge. The people in charge is you. If the deep state is getting in the way, expose them, fire people, name names, do what your base wants. If you can't do that, step aside, let someone else do the job. Or else it's going to be another UAP situation where whistleblowers make the same claims that the government is hiding the truth, a plausible assertion, to be frank, but then fail to give up the goods. To be abundantly clear, if I haven't already, we know the government lies to us. We know they hide information and they redact files. We know to be skeptical of the people in charge. But we're going to be even more skeptical of the people who are now in charge and promised us to show what's behind the curtain if they try to get away with binders full of information we already had. And so I agree with Steve Bannon. It was indeed a fiasco.
So I agree with large measures of that, Robbie. There are points that I disagree with that I'll get to in a minute. I, like you, would like to see more disclosure of the Jeffrey Epstein files and more information put out there. I agree with you that it is quite appropriate to be skeptical of what the government tells us about all sorts of things. I think that sometimes that leads into pretty zany, wild areas, but in this case, I think there is a case to be made for greater disclosure. And I would also say, to your point, that it is to your credit that you note that there are people associated with both parties who have some contact with him. I think part of the resistance to the quote-unquote conspiracy theory is the idea being put forth by, by some on the right that this is all going to catch up politicians on the left and it is being cast in a partisan light in that way. And we saw just very recently Elon Musk on with Joe Rogan. Now we'll get to Rogan later on in the show again. But Elon Musk was making an argument that I just found absurd, which was that Bill Clinton and Bill Gates and LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman were had been conspiring to defeat Donald Trump for fear of what the Epstein files contain. And it's like, Bill Clinton has been a Democrat all his life and is a former Democratic president. He doesn't need a nefarious reason to want the Republican nominee for president to be defeated. Reid Hoffman's a Liberal donor for years and years and years. So I think that kind of absurdity is what is partly feeding this suggestion of a conspiracy theory. I would like to see more information about Epstein out there. Yes, we always put the caveat that having met Jeffrey Epstein does not in itself prove guilt or make someone complicit in pedophilia, but more information is better than less information.
And for me, what I always say is I think it really matters at what time you had an association with Jeffrey Epstein. Because like Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, both of them, their associations with Epstein were prior to his initial arrest for underage sexual misconduct that landed him in a unusually and suspiciously light sentence situation. Where I want to know more information is the people who resumed an association with him, which do include Bill Gates in a very important way that had something to do with his divorce, Melinda Gates warning him that he should not associate with this man, and the pretty exhaustive relationship with certain figures at Bank of America. There are a lot of questions about the financial relationship between Jeffrey Epstein, Bank of America, and the Virgin Islands that come after this man should have been known to be someone you don't want to have anything to do with. So I agree with you totally on what you just said. There can be an obsession with this issue that's making it sound like, I think I said this on TV over the weekend. I think I said this on Newsmax. I said this even to conservatives, that like they think there's going to be a tape that comes out of like Bill and Hillary Clinton having a threesome with Satan on Jeffrey Epstein's island. Right. That's not going to happen.
Right.
But the FBI does have more files, and you can't just pass it off that what we've already seen and what we already know about. There are more files to be released. So get on that. Don't promise things you can't deliver, and don't blame. I think not just me, but really dyed-in-the-wool conservative MAGA people are going to start rolling their eyes if Republicans just blame the deep state or the Democrats or the people in charge. Well, you're in charge. You have as much political power as the Republican Party has ever had in my lifetime right now. So do something. Don't like the Republican House Committee posted a Rickroll GIF. Like they thought it was hilarious that nothing came of it. Like you people aren't the opposition anymore.
Right.
You're the government.
Right.
Do what your base wants.
Right, and also do not promise explosive revelations and then just produce material that it has been, for the most part, in the public domain for a long time. That's pointless.
All right. Next up on Rising, we will discuss the big showdown in the Oval Office between Trump, Vance, and Zelensky. We'll hit it from all sides. Stay with us. It was the meeting seen and heard around the globe.
It took place in the Oval Office Friday, and it blew up the old world order. Let's watch.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
The clash then went further south, with Zelensky trying to defend himself and Trump berating him. Let's watch.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly what
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influenced.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Over the weekend, we've seen seismic tremors rippling across the Atlantic. Europe has jumped into action, pushing to create a so-called coalition of the willing and trying to come up with a peace deal to present to America. The Kremlin applauded the public humiliation of the Ukrainian leader and America's seeming policy shift. The Russian news agency TASS, which got into that Oval Office meeting under contentious circumstances while the AP was blocked, reported that President Volodymyr Zelensky, quote, interrupted, argued and was rude to the press. Many Republicans sang from the same song sheet, even those like GOP South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, who was once an ardent supporter of Ukraine, called the meeting a, quote, complete utter disaster, unquote, and said he's never been more proud of Trump. Let's take a look.
I've never been more proud of President Trump for showing the American people and the world you don't trifle with this man. He was very positive. He was very upbeat. He wanted to get a ceasefire. He wants to end the war. And Zelensky felt like he needed to bait Trump in the Oval Office. JD was awesome. This was a missed opportunity. And the question for me, for the Ukrainian people, I don't know if Zelensky can ever get you to where you want to go with the United States. Either he dramatically changes or you need to get somebody new.
Majority Leader Mike Johnson, who said last year that he'd rather send bullets than bodies to Ukraine, said this on Meet the Press Sunday.
I've never seen anything like President Zelensky's behavior there. He berated and interrupted his host, and instead of expressing gratitude for the extraordinary help that the U.S. has provided his country and effectively helped him stay alive and stay in power. So the way that went down was very disappointing. I hope and pray, frankly, that President Zelensky will come to his senses, come back to President Trump, express gratitude as he should, apologize for his behavior there, and accept this mineral rights deal, because that is the best way for us to get to a point of peace over there in that region, and it's in the interest of both countries.
Many GOP lawmakers, like Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona, applauded Trump and Vance for standing up to Zelensky. He wrote, quote, "Dictator Zelensky had the audacity to disrespect President Donald Trump and VP J.D. Vance during what should have been a friendly meeting, and POTUS rightfully showed him the door. This is the leadership America has craved for 4 years." But some in the GOP did take the side of Zelensky. Senator Lisa Murkowski said, quote, "I am sick to my stomach as the administration appeared to be walking away from our allies and embracing Putin, a threat to democracy and U.S. values around the world."
On the Democratic side, California Senator Adam Schiff tweeted over the weekend, "Exactly 2 people are celebrating the United States' great abdication, Trump and Putin. The world weeps, Europe acts, and decades of U.S. leadership have been lost." Well, go ahead.
Well, this is a very polarizing one because virtually all Democrats and even some Republicans, where I think are describing this as now we're on Russia's side and we've betrayed Ukraine. Meanwhile, conservatives are thrilled with what Trump and Vance did, heartily agree that Zelensky was rude and that he should come back with his tail between his legs if he wants this deal to survive. And I don't quite know, honestly, where public opinion is. I think, frankly, there's a lot more interest in foreign policy in general, and Ukraine specifically, in elite media than there is among the American people. But conservatives, at least, for a long time have shown dwindling support for continuing to fund Ukraine. And if I were to, I would say that Zelensky should have been more cognizant that public attitude to fund this war has substantially evaporated, and the reality is a deal needs to be reached.
So I always knew this was one of the topics today we would disagree on more strongly. I think there is a debate which you and I have had previously about funding for Ukraine and how the war ends. But I think that the behaviour of Trump and Vance in that meeting was disgraceful, honestly, and I think they set Zelensky up. This idea that Zelensky was rude, the heated part of that confrontation kicked off when Trump suggested that Zelensky had an unreasonable hatred for Vladimir Putin. The guy invaded his country, doesn't think his country should exist, and is himself the dictator or the authoritarian that Trump tries to label Zelensky as being. Then you had J.D. Vance weighing in with this argument about, it's time to try diplomacy. And Zelensky made the entirely reasonable argument that when diplomacy was previously tried, Putin just didn't live up to his commitments. These are entirely valid things for Zelensky to raise. I think they were sparked by Trump and to an even greater extent Vance to try to provoke a confrontation, because I think the whole momentum in the Trump administration is to try to get out of any moral obligation to help Ukraine, and I think that's wrong and disgraceful.
Well, I don't know that trying to get out of any obligation to help Ukraine is wrong or disgraceful. I think it is possible, I don't know that it is the case for certain, that Vance did what he did in a very calculated way in order to tank the mineral deal, because I think there are many, both libertarians and populists in the MAGA coalition, who don't even want the mineral deal, because does that end up putting Americans in potential harm's way? I mean, it very much matters what Russia feels about this deal, and if they're, again, I just want peace. I want diplomacy. I'm happy to have an economic arrangement with Ukraine if it is safe for Americans to be involved there. If it's not, or that's unclear with Russia, well, then that's actually could be a covert way to draw the U.S. into providing actual military support for Ukraine. And if we don't have that worked out on the Russian side, well, then we're actually getting closer with this deal to World War III than we'd be currently when we're just sending money. So I suspect J.D. Vance might have that concern and was perhaps trying to sabotage the deal on that basis. And I'm not sure that's wrong on a policy outcome. Look, I don't care very much I just don't care about decorum or whatever. And that goes both ways. I don't care that Zelensky doesn't wear a suit. I don't care about that at all. That a lot of right-wing people are mad about that. I don't give an F. I don't care. Sure. This is very silly. But I also don't care that they were arguing in front of the media. I would actually rather have our politicians arguing in front of us where we can see, rather than argue behind closed doors and then have then they do the fake, we're on the same page, sort of in front of you, we all agree, when they actually have serious, profound, fundamental disagreements. Have them in public so we can judge for ourselves.
I don't disagree with the idea that it is useful to have arguments in public. We have them quite frequently.
What if we had our argument behind the closed doors and then we just gave a synopsis?
Pretend that we agree on everything. That would serve nobody. But the point here is, Trump is berating a guy who is trying to save his own country against very, very steep odds, and in the process implying that the United States is at least or at best neutral to a large nation invading a sovereign country that borders it. And that, oh, well, that's just what happens. And this is Trump going after this guy, an American president who got out of Vietnam service because of bone spurs, going after a guy who has been trying to shore up the defense of his country for 3 years.
So I will agree with you that there's a little too much, the anti-Zelensky fervor on the right goes further than I would go for certain. And I'm a little wary of, and then it's also a little too kind toward Vladimir Putin. I don't want to be more proximate to Russia or more dismissive of Russia's authoritarian impulses. Russia remains a global rival. So I agree with you on that. But I think what you just said, like trying to save his country, is painting a rosier picture of what he's doing. You can argue he's had no choice but to take the actions he's taken because his country did get invaded, but just throwing more Ukrainians into what is likely, what is almost certain over time to be a doomed effort to defend the country is, how many more people are we willing to let die on both sides of this conflict in order to say it's so important that this part of Ukraine, this territory that has been conquered by Russia, remains a part of Ukraine? 100,000, 500,000, 1 million, just reality is that more and more people will die until an agreement is reached or until the entire country is conquered by Russia. And so I don't think, the trying to save his country, our intentions can all be very good. And I agree that he's invaded, which is why I don't go to the mat 10 out of 10, bad guy, dictate, the word so evil, responsible. I don't agree with any of that. I don't care how he dresses. But his intentions might be perfectly good. But the reality is the reality. And the reality is Russia will win this war and is killing people left and right, his own people. He's saving the boundaries of the countries at the expense of everyone in it dying. It doesn't seem so great to me.
But the argument that you're making is essentially an argument for appeasement. It is to say, if a larger country does something to a smaller country, then that's just tough for the smaller country. And if its territory gets taken, well, there's got to be a price for peace. At some point, you have to maintain or seek to maintain the territorial integrity of the country.
Well, does the U.S. have to do that? We're not committed to defending Ukraine on paper. If it's very important, Europe can. And look, they're all forming a coalition to defend Ukraine or whatever. That's fine. They would be less addicted maybe to Russian energy if they were real serious about countering the threat of Russia. That would be the most damaging thing they could do. And of course, Trump's been warning about that for years. But if they want to spend the money on it, fine. I just don't know why the boundaries of this country need to be predominantly our problem.
I just think that if you go down that road, you get into a situation where you just say the United States will no longer play any leadership role, and into that void come Russia and China and various other adversaries, and I think it's very dangerous.
Will you tell us what you think? We'll have more Rising right after this. Measles is back and spreading. A week ago, it was in Texas. It can now also be found in Mexico, Kentucky, California, Georgia, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Alaska. Local outlets are also reporting one case in Washington state. The illness has killed one child.
Health and Human Services head Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been a vocal vaccine critic. He recently downplayed the outbreak as not unusual, but he seemed to change his tune last night.
RFK Jr. wrote an op-ed for Fox News published Sunday evening saying that measles is a highly contagious respiratory illness with certain health risks, especially to unvaccinated individuals. Vaccines not only protect individual children from measles, but also contribute to community immunity, protecting those who are unable to be vaccinated due to medical reasons. That's from RFK Jr. in that op-ed, which comes in response to this measles outbreak in Texas, where 146 cases have been confirmed so far. This outbreak has taken the life of, as I said previously, one school-age child who was unvaccinated. This is the first measles-related death in over 10 years.
Now, let's remember last year RFK Jr. was asked if he would recommend that children get the measles, mumps and rubella, MMR, vaccine, and this is how that went.
So for America's children right now, do you recommend they take the MMR vaccine? Okay, one last fun question. One last one.
But the question now is it too late for his latest call to action?
Yeah, I don't think it's too late. And also that quick clip of him just not wanting to talk about, I don't know that was indicative of anything.
Well, I've seen the longer clip from which that is culled, and I don't think it is misrepresenting him. He is irritated by the interview, but the question is still, would you recommend that people take the MMR vaccine? And
hasn't he previously said that his kids were totally up to date on the vaccine schedule until COVID vaccine?
Well, if he has, why would it be so hard to say yes then?
Well, I don't know, and maybe it isn't, because he wrote this op-ed, which I think is great, saying that people should definitely look into this as a good choice for a lot of people, noting the community benefits of vaccinated people, noting that the unvaccinated are at greater risk of a bad health outcome, and it's a good op-ed.
I mean, I think that the issue here is that there is a change in tone. Now, if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has become more of an enthusiast for vaccinations, I welcome him to the pro-vaccination fold. I think his history thus far has been very different from that. I think it has been one that he has pushed misinformation at times and has certainly in terms of his public profile profited from doing so. Now, if he has in a position of power sought to modify that position or ease that position, I think that's a good thing. And I think that if he had continued down the road that he was on, it would be a very dangerous thing. My whole resistance to him when he was up for confirmation was rooted in his attitudes toward vaccinations generally.
Well, it seems like he's putting. Do you feel somewhat put at ease then?
As I say, I think it's good that he's saying what he's saying. The tone of those remarks in the op-ed are different to what we have seen from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. previously. I will be interested, honestly, to see how his Maha folks react to that, because I think it is an op-ed that is significantly more pro-vaccine than they are accustomed to. And obviously a lot of anti-vaxxers are very much in the RFK Jr. constituency. So we'll see what they have to say.
There's also, I do think sometimes the pro-vaccine and anti-vaccine end up getting a little reductive, because these vaccines are not all quite the same. And then there's, I'm pro-vaccine in that I think you absolutely ought to be able to take a vaccine, and that vaccines are a good choice for a lot of people in a lot of different circumstances. I'm fully vaccinated, including with the COVID vaccine. I don't think the COVID vaccine should be required of anyone. If opposing vaccine I have questions about how the health community sold that vaccine, including questions now that even the top people in charge of selling it, including Fauci's BFF, Deborah Birx said about how it was marketed as a prevention of infection rather than just severe disease and death. I haven't paid attention to every single thing RFK Jr. has said about vaccines ever. Certainly the connection he drew between vaccines and autism is not one that has been borne out by the data as far as I know, although again, I'm not an expert. That's what most people have concluded from looking at it.
It's been debunked.
So
the British doctor who proposed that was censured for basically cooking the books, but anyway.
Yeah, well. So fine, but I think, especially for the vaccine resistance, I think, just what can the government do? I think this is exactly the right thing. Here's someone who has some credibility among people who are reticent about vaccines, saying, look, this is a very serious, it can be a very serious disease. Yeah. It affects children. You trust me because I don't just, utter everything that pharmaceutical companies say. You trust me, and I'm saying that the measles vaccine is something you really ought to look into if you haven't gotten it, because it's a very serious disease, and it has a good track record of preventing death from it. So sure. I think that's great.
I mean, the measles vaccination had effectively eliminated measles from this country. And I hear what you're saying when you say the anti-vax and pro-vax labels are reductive. But my point is that the skepticism about one vaccine, the COVID vaccine, one set of vaccines, I suppose I should say, to be technical about it, has actually percolated through to other vaccines. So for years, for example, the goal with measles has been a 95% vaccination rate. Lots of states in the United States are now below that, and they appear to be below that because of the spread of what I think is fair to call anti-vaccine sentiment. And I think that's where the danger lies.
Well, I agree, and that is dangerous. I think blowback against the COVID vaccine is what, to some degree, what has caused that. I mean, Deborah Birx also thinks that, right? That's what she said. That was the gist of her remarks in that interview, that she regrets how, now she was not taking personal responsibility, even though I think she should, for how it was portrayed to the public. But people losing a bit of faith in that vaccine has caused an uptick in not wanting to get vaccinated for other things where the vaccine is much more effective at preventing transmission as well as it is. And it's not totally preventative of transmission, but does a really good job of transmission. The measles vaccine does, as opposed to the COVID vaccine.
I mean, I think that the difficulty in that argument, I think, is that it ignores the role played by actual bad faith actors in propagating anti-vaccine nonsense. So it conflates skepticism or whether initial claims were overblown with just conspiracy-minded kind of hucksters, and I think that's kind of a problem.
That's fine, but I mean, a lot of what they said, a lot of what I remember hoping and believing was going to be true about the COVID vaccine in terms of it reducing cases to nothing. Remember breakthrough cases? We were told there's just going to be a small number of breakthrough cases, as with any vaccine. Small number of people are going to get it anyway. I got vaccinated in April or May, somewhere around then, of when they had become available. And then in July, I got COVID for the first time, and I was like, oh, I'm one of the people who got a breakthrough case. Imagine that. And then everybody got a breakthrough case. Everybody on Earth.
Well,
I don't know. Like, who was really, really wrong? The people who said that was going to be a rare occurrence.
I am, of course, vaccinated, and to my knowledge, I've never had COVID, but who knows?
Who knows? Well, you say that, and that could be the case, but don't the experts say that, like, 95% of all people have had it at this point?
Yeah, so I
might have had it and not had symptoms, or not. It was so mild you didn't know, or some of the tests can be inconclusive. So you probably had it. Maybe you didn't, but
maybe I'm just super resistant.
Maybe you're super resistant. Maybe we gotta take Niall's blood and start injecting it into people.
Inject my genes into everyone.
Then we're gonna Hulk out like Niall. We're all gonna become Irishmen. Green indeed.
COVID free.
We have a lot more to talk about on Rising. Please stay with us. Everyone deserves a second chance, right? Or maybe even a third or fourth. Well, maybe not everyone. Here's an interesting individual reappearing on the political scene. Former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Cuomo, who resigned in August 2021 amid numerous claims of sexual misconduct, announced Saturday that he's planning a new run for mayor of New York City. Take a look.
Did I always do everything right in my years of government service? Of course not. Would I do some things differently, knowing what I know now? Certainly. Did I make mistakes? Some painfully? Definitely. And I believe I learned from them and that I am a better person for it. And I hope to show you that every day. But I promise you this, I know what needs to be done and I know how to do it.
Now, apart from the sexual misconduct accusations against Cuomo, he also oversaw the coronavirus pandemic response in New York, penning an edict in March of 2020 that directed nursing homes to admit recovering COVID-19 patients discharged from hospitals.
So his comeback attempt right now comes after millions of taxpayers' dollars were spent in court, underwriting Cuomo's effort to try to clear his name over both those controversies, the COVID and the sexual indiscretion allegations, or sexually inappropriate allegations. Meanwhile, New York City Controller Brad Lander, who is also running for mayor, posted on X, quote, "In honor of your sad attempt to get attention, let's remember your time as governor of New York, before you resigned for sexually harassing 13 women and leading thousands of elderly New Yorkers to their deaths during COVID-19. Designer Kenneth Cole, on the other hand, praised Cuomo, posting, quote, Andrew Cuomo just declared his candidacy for New York City mayor. It will be a refreshing reminder of what strong, dignified and humane leadership looks like. Actress Cynthia Nixon, who challenged but lost to Andrew Cuomo in the 2018 gubernatorial primary, wrote, Andrew Cuomo himself is a walking crisis. If you thought Adams's corruption made him vulnerable and beholden to Trump, you can't begin to imagine what Trump will have on Cuomo, who already had to resign once from office in disgrace.
This is amazing.
You're a big Andrew Cuomo fan, I know, Rob.
Such a fan. No, I am not a fan whatsoever. He did resign after multiple sexual misconduct accusations. And look, I am someone who believes in due process, believes in the presumption of innocence, even in terms of the public square. I believe that people who come forward and make such accusations deserve our respect and our attention. They do not deserve automatic belief. These accusations should be vetted, and people should draw informed conclusions based on what the journalism system or the criminal justice system produces. But in addition to all that, the accusations for the way he handled COVID is appalling, and it is not just for the nursing home policy, which he can plausibly say was federal guidance that was implemented in other places, but also his effort to cover up the extent of the deaths under this policy in order to make his book more appealing for how heroic he was. That is the central disqualifying sin of his, to my mind, and it is unfathomable to me that he is trying to mount a quick comeback. This was only a few years ago. A return to public governmental life. Perhaps the Eric Adams scandal has opened the door to that, but my God, New Yorkers who have to pick between these two people, neither of whom I have any affection for, and Cuomo I have, and then some negative affection for. I feel bad for the city of New York.
So it's interesting here about Cuomo because, as we noted with people like Cynthia Nixon in the introduction, there are people on the left who really detest Andrew Cuomo, and people like yourself from a more right-wing perspective who do so, or a more libertarian perspective who do so. The point, I think, about the nursing homes is well made because it goes all the way up to allegations, which of course he denies, that Andrew Cuomo lied to Congress. Because to make a very long and somewhat complicated story short, there was a key report from New York State, which Andrew Cuomo was asked about before Congress. And he said that he couldn't recall having seen it or reviewing it or whatever. And it transpired that he, in fact, had been involved in editing that report, which was revealed by the New York Times. So that in itself is highly, highly dodgy at best, and is something that does call into question his fitness for office. Now, I think the sexual misconduct allegations will get the lion's share of the attention. As you say, the people who feel victimized by Andrew Cuomo absolutely deserve to be taken seriously. It is worth noting, to your point about due process, that only one criminal charge was ever made against him, and that charge was dropped before it ever reached trial. He vehemently protests his innocence, although he has said that he didn't realize the extent to which the lines had been redrawn for conduct between men and women, or people in power and their underlings.
Yeah, look, I was willing to let this person fade into obscurity. Now, he wants to come back on the public stage and run for office again. We are going to be relitigating all of these things. We are going to be looking into the sexual misconduct accusations again. We're going to be, you're right that it is a complicated story. The aides that were told to use different data, who he told what. It's a complicated story, but we're going to be talking about it again because he has opened the door to that. It is interesting, as you point out, that he has enemies on the left, enemies on the right. Eric Adams as well has enemies all over the place. So this is going to be an interesting clash of people where the sides are not. Maybe the sides will become clear. Maybe Eric Adams is just becoming this more conservative figure because of his alliance with the Trump administration. He is still a Democrat. And now there are other people, my understanding, and I correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you know more about it, the dynamics of this primary, Democratic primary, it seems that the odds of Cuomo has very good chances of winning, although it could be, who knows. Eric Adams fate doesn't look so solid right now, and there could be other people in the mix. But Cuomo just has such name recognition that he's going to have a lot of advantages.
Absolutely. And he's also got, he's very well connected with the real estate industry in New York. There's a super PAC supporting him that is hoping to raise millions of dollars, which would obviously add to that name recognition, potentially blow rivals out of the water. One of the interesting parts of all this is whether further candidates will get into the race, because right now you have Adams as the incumbent, who is very seriously flawed for all the reasons we talk about, and Cuomo, who we've just covered, and then candidates who are like Brad Lander, the city controller, who is basically at least somewhat left-leaning. But there are other people who want Adrian Adams, no relation to Eric, who's the Speaker of the City Council, to run as a centrist alternative to Cuomo. We'll see how that all pans out.
That sounds good to me. Virtually any idea sounds good to me other than Andrew Cuomo. And again, I'm not particularly a fan of Eric Adams either. This is really I tweeted this the other day, so I'm going to steal from myself. Yes. It's like although you won't get this reference, Niall, this is the Greyjoys versus the Boltons.
Is this Game of Thrones again?
Two very, very just despicable factions.
You had a reference recently that I did understand. Was it June? I can't remember. But once you go to your Game of Thrones thing, I get completely lost. But I'm sure it's an opposite reference.
Amazing. Well, we will be following this campaign in great detail. We will be looking for some guests to talk about, maybe remind people what Andrew Cuomo presided over. Coming up next, what do Elon Musk and Bill Clinton actually have in common? We'll tell you. Stay with us.
Elon Musk's Doge has spurred the, quote, resignations of at least 75,000 employees. Tens of thousands more have been fired, with more axings on the horizon.
Musk's opponents are crying foul, but those supporting him point to the Clinton-era program called National Partnership for Reinventing Government. Like Musk's Doge, the cost-cutting measure eliminated hundreds of thousands of federal jobs, and mirroring Doge, it was aimed at streamlining processes by cutting bureaucracy. So, what's the difference?
Elaine Kamarck not only worked for the Clinton administration, she led the initiative we're talking about. She's now a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, and she's with us now to discuss further. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So why don't we start with you summarising what you do see as the differences, because clearly you see very significant differences between the project that you were so sort of foundationally involved in and what Elon Musk is doing. So in summary, what are those differences?
Well, I think the basic difference was that we had a theory of the case, and we went into every basic cabinet department in the country, and we said, what are you doing? What's working? What's not working? Where can we cut? And where can we not affect operations? They are taking a much more aggressive and sort of across-the-board tack. They're not bothering to look at what these people are doing before they fire them. And you can see that in the fact that they've already had to hire back people. They tried to fire people at the Nuclear Energy, National Nuclear Safety Administration that guards our nuclear stockpiles. Oops, had to hire them back. They fired some people working on avian bird flu. Whoops, had to hire them back. They hired some people working on Ebola. They had to hire them back. So it's a very blunt instrument they're using. And we did a lot of cutting. We used new technology, but we went in agency by agency, and we tried to make sure that we were cutting fat, not muscle. And they're just cutting everything.
Can you go into greater detail about how your initiative eliminated government positions? What was your strategy for identifying areas where cuts could be made?
Well, we had a theory of the case. The theory of the case was based on what was then a new technology called the internet. So I might want to remind people that back in 1993, federal agencies didn't have websites, okay? You couldn't go to a website and find, for instance, the location of your Social Security office, okay? It was all brand new stuff. And what we realized, and Al Gore was the leader, and he was a technologist before there were such things as technologists. Al Gore realized that the internet and all the ascendant IT and technologies would be used to cut, in fact, layers of management. And that's where we cut. We concentrated on getting rid of layers of management in agency after agency. That included regional offices. We closed a lot of regional offices, etc. And so we had a theory of the case, and it worked pretty well because we got ourselves a buyout bill. Congress passed it. They passed it with bipartisan majorities, which meant that civil servants taking it felt comfortable that they would actually get the money. By the way, this time they don't feel comfortable about that. So we were just more careful, frankly. We were just slower, more careful, and we did end up with a lot of savings. And we also ended up with a lot of cutting of regulations, which they seem to have abandoned, which is too bad because initially they were going to do a regulatory review. And that's one of the most important things people can do when they're doing government reform.
What do you think is motivating Musk to take the more cavalier, shall we say, approach that he is taking? I mean, you used the word careful pertaining to your own approach, and you know he's taken a very different stance, which is to move as swiftly and as sweepingly as possible. What do you think is the motivation behind that?
I think it is that, first of all, Trump has one term. He has 4 years. We had 8 years to do this, and we worked at it all 8 years. I think second, Musk is a special government employee. I think he probably needs to get out of there at some point by 4th of July 2026, which is the deadline they've set. And the problem is that they're going to have to, every time they cut, they make a mistake. And Musk has admitted that. And he said, and we'll fix our mistakes. So far, they've actually, I give them credit, they fixed their mistakes pretty quickly. But there's going to come a time when these things are going to blow up on them. And the public is going to not get its Social Security checks. They won't be able to get their drugs paid for by Medicare. They're not going to get their tax refunds on time because they've just cut thousands of people from IRS. So there's they're just playing with fire on this. I think the second thing, which is more disturbing, frankly, because I do believe a lot of these cuts will end up being reinstated. The second thing, which is more disturbing, is the fact that I think they are going after government databases, and they want to train AI systems on government data. And for what purpose? They say it's to root out fraud. Okay, but who's going to own these systems? Is this one way to make, Elon Musk the king of the world by owning all the data on every American who has Social Security or pays taxes? That we don't have a handle on. What is he going to do with all this data?
So I agree with most of what you're saying, but here does emerge an interesting split. And I hear you on the concerns you're raising. But, the upgrading the actual infrastructure and websites and user experience, all of that kind of stuff in government, that actually does speak to me as a potential area of expertise for Elon, or realistically the team of people he puts in place who, he's a tech leader, CEO. Mm-hmm. I obviously don't think, government should just serve Elon's specific business interests, so I share some of those concerns. However, the potential for AI or other new technological developments to make government, vastly more efficient for people reliant on its services seems like one of the best cases for putting someone like Elon in charge, or again, Elon's team in charge of handling something like this. Given that, people have a variety of views about, whether Twitter is better or worse, but he did substantially reduce the number of people who work there with, I would argue, minimal impact to the way the users actually experience. The website doesn't glitch out or something now. That kind of efficiency brought to government would be pretty amazing, no?
Well, and I totally agree with you on that. And in fact, my hope was that Elon Musk would go in there and use his considerable talents and the talents of others to really do an upgrade with the government's IT systems so that the user experience would, in fact, be better. The problem is that instead he's gotten himself into slashing numbers of people which he then has to bring back. He's causing chaos in the government, and it's going to degrade the user experience, not improve the user experience. If he would focus on technology and upgrading the technology, this would be a huge, important service to the American people. But instead, he seems to be hell-bent on creating chaos in these agencies, and it's going to have an effect on their service to the citizen.
Elaine K. Mark, thanks so much for joining us here on Rising. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Next up, we will talk to a Texas Observer reporter who uncovered an ICE prosecutor behind what he says is a white supremacy X account. Stay with us for that. The Texas Observer recently published an article linking the writings of an anonymous white supremacist account on X to an active US immigration and customs enforcement attorney. Journalist Steve Monticelli uncovered that the writings of an ex-user named Glomar were coming from James Joseph Rodden, an assistant chief counsel for ICE in the Dallas area. Monticelli used various social media postings and publicly available information to make the connection. The posts could violate the professional rules of conduct of the DC bar where Rodden holds his license. Here to discuss his findings in the article is freelance investigative journalist Stephen Monticelli. Stephen, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So first up, I think we'll just have to be a little bit careful in the legalities of this. Mr. Rodden did not, at least at the time of publication of your article, he didn't respond to requests for comment, correct?
No, we tried to reach him multiple ways via email, phone, in person, and we were repeatedly directed to contact the ICE press office.
Fair enough.
Can you share what is the evidence that has led you to conclude? I'm not doubting your reporting that this was in fact him.
Well, as we report in the article, it's a large amount of information that resulted in us making this conclusion. This account has been posting for over a decade, and during that time revealed a large number of personal biographical details that allowed us to build a profile of who this individual was. But I would say the big break in the case really came when we found posts that indicated this anonymous account operator was a party to a federal lawsuit against the federal COVID vaccination mandate for employees, and that they were a federal employee themselves. That gave us actually a pretty narrow list of names, a short list that we could then compare those individuals to the biographical details that were revealed by this account, as well as by another set of forum accounts that we also identified as being connected to the same person. And I would say the cherry on top for me, the thing that really pushed me into the realm of certainty on this, was that I sat behind this lawyer in immigration court. These are pretty small courtrooms. I was within about 6 feet of the guy, and I could see clearly over his shoulder him using his phone to scroll his Twitter feed and then even draft a post in the courtroom, which I documented the timestamp of. And then when we checked the account, it had posted 1 minute after I had seen him start draft the post. So I think, the full set of details are in the article, and I would encourage anyone who, may have some skepticism to go read it for themselves.
No, absolutely. It's a very long and deeply reported piece. And I think to the point of alleviating skepticism, I think sometimes when people see terms like linked to white supremacy, they're like, well, what exactly was this person expressing? How noxious were these views? But some of the posts from this Glomar responder is the actual account name, just seem absolutely unarguably racist. America is a white nation founded by whites. Our country should favor us is one of them. At another point, the poster says, I'm not a commie, I'm a fascist. Another one which ends in a profanity that we can't say here, but it begins, all blacks are foreign to my people. So, in a sense, those speak for themselves. But the fact that those views may be coming from someone linked to ICE, that's obviously incredibly disturbing, right?
Well, that's certainly what we've heard from people who we spoke to about this. And I should say that local immigration lawyers were very hesitant to speak on the record about this due to some concerns around their cases potentially being put at jeopardy due to making public statements about this. But I think certainly there are concerns with regard to whether this activity could violate not only the rules of the Washington, D.C. bar, where this individual has their license, or at least they acquired their license to practice law, but also it could potentially violate professional codes of conduct that are in place at ICE.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say. It seems pretty inarguable if this is that person that they should be fired. What is the investigation look like that is taking place?
So what I can tell you is that ICE has actually not even confirmed positively that this individual works for them, even though we confirmed that a number of other ways, including observing them in court. ICE has said that they are investigating whether the account belongs to an employee of theirs. There's been no other information provided about the current status or how long that could take. 3 congressmen have now sent official letters to either DHS or ICE demanding a swift investigation and disciplinary action if necessary. And what I can also say is that I visited immigration courtrooms where Rodden was supposed to be, had been scheduled to be last week, and he was no longer present. He was not present. He had been swapped out for a different ICE attorney. Where exactly he is, what he's doing, whether he's on administrative leave or whether he's been reassigned to different work, I cannot say for certain. I think at this point we simply have to wait for the process to play out.
And I know you said right at the top of this interview that he had not responded pre-publication to any requests for comment. Since your piece was published and since it has rightly created such a stir, has there been any post-publication contact from him or from anyone representing him?
No, not from him, not from ICE. The only folks that I have heard from afterwards were either the staff of the congressional officials I mentioned or others that are simply concerned about what they've read.
Sorry, Robbie, you have. Stephen, that is a fascinating piece, as you say. It would be. We would encourage everyone to read it, and thanks for joining us on Rising.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, former Mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, has some tough advice for Democrats. We'll tell you all about it. Stay with us.
Former Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel had some serious criticism for Democrats for putting too much focus on who's in what bathroom and locker room and also letting education fall and crime rise. Here he was on Real Time with Bill Maher on Friday. Take a look.
We've gone through 5 years where people became way too permissive of the culture. They were all, which is why everything's locked up at Walgreens and CVS, and that is a disaster. Yeah. And our school, and I'll say this about our schools. I don't want to hear another word about the locker room. I don't want to hear another word about the bathroom. You better start focusing on the classroom.
I agree.
We had the worst reading scores for 8th graders in 30 years. And nobody, not a governor, not a mayor, not a president, not a secretary of education is talking about it. We're all wrapped up. Look, in 7th grade, if I known that I could have said the word they and got in the girls' bathroom, I would have done it. Okay, we literally are a superpower. We're facing off against China with 1.4 billion people, and 2/3 of our children can't read 8th grade level.
There was more where that came from.
What's really crazy about where the party's gone, it's taken an identity politics that the only way you have a moral standing is you're somehow been hurt. And that is insane. And if you want to take a moral standing of an identity politics based on where you've been hurt, then we're going to do it about the working and middle-class families of this country who's gotten the shaft over the last 30 years.
So these come at a time where the Democratic Party is obviously engaged in a lot of soul searching. I saw online that there was recently a meeting of Third Way Democrats, a kind of centrist organization that produced a report on what they think Democrats need to do to win voters. None of this is surprising. Their takeaway on why Democrats have a cultural disconnect with the working class is overemphasis on identity politics, faculty lounge problem of seeming judgmental, out of touch, and dismissive of non-elites, failure to prioritize economic concerns, weak messaging, fear of dissent within the party. That's kind of interesting. Candidates and operatives need to feel more comfortable just saying no to activist groups, attachment to unpopular institutions like the media, government bureaucracy, while being critical of things that working class people value, like churches, small business, and the police. So, this is all advice that I don't think the left and progressives would want Democratic Party to take necessarily, because it cuts against their policies, although what policies you want and what strategy is necessary to win office are not necessarily compatible things. Everybody likes to pretend that if you just did what I think is right, then you would be more popular. I'm actually under no illusions that is the case.
Yeah, I mean, look,
times.
Rahm Emanuel is someone who I am skeptical of for reasons in his personal record. So we'll get into the bigger argument about identity politics in a second. When Rahm Emanuel was mayor, one of the things that hampered his popularity in Chicago, rightly, was that he fought for more than a year to keep dash cam footage of the murder of Laquan McDonald out of public view, and eventually had to air that footage only under a judge's order. And that is something that I don't think we should forget when he presents himself as one of these sort of wise men. He was also someone, to the point about centrism, who discouraged then President Obama from going forward with the bid to pass the Affordable Care Act. I understand that conservatives don't like that, but I think Democrats and liberals think of it as perhaps the key accomplishment of the Obama presidency, and Emanuel was against that. He's also personally wealthy because he's had a business career often in tandem or in revolving around his political career. Now, there is separately an argument about whether identity politics has consumed the Democratic Party too much. And that argument I am sympathetic to mostly, to a degree. I think that there's a problem, though, in that people tend to think of this as left or centre just as these blanket terms. I would argue that in economic terms, one of the difficulties the Democratic Party has had recently is in not connecting with people's anger about economic stagnation, rising wealth inequality and things of that nature. That, I think, is an area where the Democratic Party could benefit from going more to the left. But on things like pronouns or bathrooms, there, though I don't like him personally, I take Emanuel's political point.
I think it's interesting, this idea that there's not enough dissent in the Democratic Party or in the inter-Democratic coalition, which I think there is some truth to, especially compared to the Republican Party, where there are vast ideological battles and differences being worked out. Now, there isn't a lot of debate over whether you like Trump or not. If you don't like Trump, you're outside the party. That issue's settled. But even some dissent and debate over how the Ukraine issue and Zelensky was handled, as we read when we discussed it. There were obviously many people siding with Trump and happy he did it, but also some not and speaking up. And then on economic issues, there's pro-tariff, anti-tariff people. There's the immigration dispute between the Vivek Elon side and the Steve Bannon side. There are some vast policy differences that are being argued about in public. I mean, even what I discussed in my radar about how the Epstein files release was handled, that was Bannon and Jack Posobiec criticizing pretty strongly Pam Bondi for how she handled it. Right. So there's a lot of arguing and differences being worked out. I won't say there's no dissent on the Democratic side. Of course there's some dissent. And when we hear people like Rahm Emanuel, Jared Golden, et cetera, speak up and say, I think Democrats are too pronoun obsessed. And then you have prominent dissenter people like John Fetterman, for instance, probably not dissenting in a direction you agree with, but dissenting nonetheless. But overall, it's not nearly as much as on the Republican side, I think.
Well, I don't know. I mean, even on the trans issue, which we've talked about a number of times here, Seth Moulton, I think, was the Democratic congressman who soon after the election was making a more, for want of a better term, centrist argument on that topic. And I do think you're seeing the old clash, which always happens between the third way types, the Bill Clinton types, and the left re-emerging. Certainly one of the more interesting things to me has been Bernie Sanders, whatever age he is now, becoming again a kind of prominent figure arguing for much more economically populist programs and so on and so forth. And to be fair to Sanders, leading the charge on why there should be a more robust defense of Ukraine in its war with Russia. So I think those dissenting voices are actually heard. And perhaps they have become a little more amplified following the defeat last November, when there's a need to reevaluate things.
Well, I do think dissenting media on the Democratic progressive left side has died off a little bit. I think I've talked about this on the show a couple times. It just becomes clearer and clearer with each passing day that. And I'm sorry this is the case for people who like progressive and leftist policies, but the media ecosystem, the very left media ecosystem that, frankly, this show was strongly a part of at one point under Crystal and Sagar, when Crystal was very, very, very pro-Bernie Sanders and delivered a lot of her personal monologues on the show about Bernie Sanders, and there were a lot of people tuning in to hear about and be excited about that, and the whole network of YouTube and internet and podcasting that was Joe Rogan himself, fan of Bernie Sanders,
right.
Now a Trump person. I think there's been a lot of dying off in that space that is interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the more mainstream outlets have always been pretty hostile to that.
Oh, entirely hostile. And they're dying off at a slower rate, but they're struggling.
Right.
But whereas a lot of the really dissenting, though, contrarian left people I'm talking about, have become, many of them have just outwardly become right-wing over time.
Yeah, I know, which is...
Some of them are in the Trump administration, Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr.
I know, that's a whole other story, which we will get into in some other debate, in some other segment.
All right, well, speak of the devil, and he shall appear. Joe Rogan and Elon Musk were looking back at CNN's coverage of the first assassination attempt, of then-candidate Donald Trump, and we're going to discuss what they said. Stay with us.
Two of President Trump's most ardent supporters, Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, seem to have questions about how the assassination attempt on the then presidential candidate unfolded. Let's take a look.
Why did that guy try to kill Trump and almost succeeded? Why did he do that?
Well, I'd like to know that.
Well, yeah, but
that one's crazy. You know the whole deal with that guy's house, professionally scrubbed, no footprint on the internet, no social media footprint.
Yeah, there's 0% chance that he has no social media footprint.
He was in a BlackRock commercial. With this kid, we don't know anything, right? And everyone stopped asking questions, and there was never a formal report. There was never press conferences where they detailed all the information that we know currently and where the investigation stands at the moment. What we know is you have a very young kid who was filmed, they knew he was there with a rangefinder a half an hour before the event.
Elon Musk sat down with Joe Rogan on his podcast on Friday. The duo were also suspicious of why CNN had live streamed that particular rally. Let's watch what they said.
You also know that CNN streamed it live, which I do not believe they did for any other rally, and certainly not for a rally that's in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of weird. The fact that they wouldn't let people be on that roof because the Secret Service lady said it was sloped and it was dangerous. That's what she didn't want to have. Meanwhile, the snipers that were on the other roof was a steeper pitch. It made no sense.
I totally agree. It makes no sense.
Many on the right shared the clip on X questioning CNN's coverage. MJ Truth Ultra wrote on X, Rogan and Elon Musk revisit the Butler assassination attempt against Donald Trump. Who the hell was Thomas Crooks? CNN streamed Trump's rally live that day, which they very rarely, if ever, do, especially not in the middle of nowhere. Did they want a murder on live television? Bill Ackman, billionaire hedge fund manager, wrote on X, what are the chances CNN was tipped off to stream the Butler rally? Why isn't this worthy of an investigation? It shouldn't be too hard to figure out who ordered the coverage and why.
Others are saying, that correctly in my view, we'll get to it in a second, that Rogan and Musk are ginning up a false conspiracy. CNN Communications replied to several of these X accounts. CNN provided live coverage of President Trump's Butler, Pennsylvania rally in anticipation of news about his pick for vice president. Any suggestion contrary to that fact is completely false. Bill Ackman, man, is that guy just like the world's dumbest billionaire? I mean, he just comes out with these ludicrous claims all the time. There isn't any nefariousness to why CNN were streaming that rally, which was that there was indeed speculation. Some thought that J.D. Vance might be there. This was going to be the time when Trump unveiled his running mate. The idea that CNN would get, which is what Ackman is implying, have some kind of heads up that there's going to be an attempt to shoot the then candidate, now President of the United States, and that for that reason alone they would tune in. It's just...
I think that's pretty unlikely.
it's like just the most absurd thing.
Yeah,
how does Bill Ackman get to be a billionaire? Well, he's so dumb.
Well, he might be. He's clearly not dumb, but it's a dumb thing to say.
It is a dumb thing to say, yes.
I don't think CNN had any foreknowledge of the attack, nor did anyone else. I think, what most interests me about the attempted assassination is how poorly the security performance was at the time. And so I understand why that makes people a little interested in, what's really going on here? But of course, you can take that too far and start to impute some massive cover-up or conspiracy. It's not... It was really not good that they didn't have a security perimeter that could anticipate that someone could make a not super difficult shot from that distance. The initial behavior of the Secret Service chief, or the excuses she gave, were just laughable in terms of, it was a sloped roof, so they couldn't be on it, but they had guards on a different slope. The guards who shot him dead were on a sloped roof. So all of that was very, very ridiculous. Why when the local police had warned of him were the Secret Service around Trump not radioed to get him out of there sooner? Yeah. So all of that is well worthy of investigation. In terms of the shooter's motivations and his lack thereof of a discernible motivation or a manifesto or a social media presence, I take their point that is a bit unusual because in many other cases of kind of political assassination or a mass shooter type deal, we often do have them elaborating on their psychotic reasons in various ways. I don't know if enough has been done to get to the bottom of this, and so I understand why they're asking questions about it.
But I am, whenever we're talking about someone with the reach of Joe Rogan or the influence of Elon Musk, I'm not sure if the, just asking questions defense really is a valid one. This is like the world's most popular podcaster who is prone to these sort of flights of fancy that are then retrospectively sometimes cloaked in this, I'm just a kind of everyman asking these questions, whenever they are putting out conspiracy theories or things that are false. And sometimes he has got caught with those things to his credit. He has apologized sometimes when he's got things wrong. Back in 2020, he said a thing about wildfires in Portland, that left-wing people had been arrested for them and that this was not widely being reported. The fact it wasn't widely being reported was because it didn't happen. It was completely false. There's another kind of amusing clip from more recently in 2023 when he, going after then President Biden for his lack of mental acuity, starts laughing about Biden saying about airports during the Revolutionary War, apparently not realizing that Biden was quoting Trump, who had said that. And then when the Trump clip was played, Joe Rogan's like, I guess he kind of messed up there. So he just sort of blithely puts these things out without seeming to feel any obligation at all to verify what he's saying. And I'm not even especially anti him. I get that the casual kind of conversational approach is what endears him to people. But having that size of an audience and seeming so fast and loose with facts is, I think, not really excusable.
That's all fine. I mean, I do think we don't know enough about this shooter, and if it is being investigated by the FBI.
Yeah, no, but the CNN thing I meant rather than the shooter.
Yes. Well, I agree with you. Yeah, the CNN thing is just clearly not true, and nobody actually should think that they had something.
And someone like Elon Musk also has to be at some level intelligent enough to know that that's nonsense. And so that's why I am deeply irritated by his propensity to just push these things out there that I think Musk himself is far too smart to actually believe.
I'm just looking at a recent article from the New York Post, recent as in, I think, a week ago, where they interviewed an investigator, a private investigator who's been looking into this, who thinks that he did not, in fact, act alone, which would be interesting. I would like, an update from the FBI on what they think they have learned about his motivations. That would help. That would help get CNN off the hook.
I mean, CNN doesn't even need to be on the hook. People didn't
they're not on the
ridiculous things. And I am not arguing against further investigation, nor am I arguing to exonerate the Secret Service from what were glaring failures at that rally. But anyway, the CNN conspiracy theory is such garbage.
That does it for us today on Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you tomorrow.